evening and welcome to the season finale of The Hard Truth. Now, today we are hosting a great brain in the energy and banking sectors who has over the years occupied various managerial positions in both national and multinational organizations. Notable among them are, being the Volunteer Authority, Tullow Oil, the Goldfields Company. He is the current board chairman of the United Bank of Africa, UBA Ghana, and several other boards. He serves on several other boards, yes. I'm talking about no other person than Mr. Kweku Awotwi, and I'll be talking about UBA, the general outlook of the banking sector, the economy, the energy sector development, and politics, among others. You don't miss this conversation. You're watching The Hard Truth. My name is Nana Akosua Konadu, Asante-Samuels. Kweku, welcome again. Third time here. Thank you so much for being here. So, head boy, which here, I want to know, what was your, did you have like a nickname or something? Like a, what you call?
You want to know my
nickname? I want to know.
Oh dear.
Tell us, what you called back then?
Well, my friends called me Awos.
Awos? Why Awos?
Someone gave it to me and it stuck.
Awos? That's not a nice name.
Boys aren't necessarily very creative.
But I hear stories about you. Your people don't really like you. I hear you were super too known. I mean, was that the case back then? How were you like, back in the day?
Oh, I think in general I was quite quiet.
Yeah.
But I think schools like in Fransbim,
right,
they sort of give a premium to academic excellence, and I was a good student.
And the head boy.
So. Those things help.
Oh, the head boy. Good to have you on The Hard Truth again. Right. So you were appointed board chair, I think, in 2020. You described your appointment as a new challenge and you were looking forward to it. Now, it's been about 3 years now, I would say. How has it been for you? And, have you been up to the task?
Well, before I joined the board of UBA, I was the chairman of Stanbic, and I was the chair for 6 years. And I served on that board for 12 years. So
on the Stanbic board?
On the Stanbic board. So I would say that after 12 years of being on the board of Stanbic, which was also a multinational bank, I got to understand, all the different functions of banking, audit, credit, risk, quite well. And so I think I was quite well prepared for the same position at UBA. UBA is also a multinational bank. It's in 20 African countries. And I think what attracted me to UBA was this, vision, this Pan-African vision led by Africans, which appealed to me a lot.
But, when you assumed this position, what were the top goals that you set for yourself? And, have you been able to achieve them?
Well, I think what's important is to understand what the UBA group, because remember UBA is a big group with many banks, to understand what the vision for that group is and what the vision in Ghana is as well. UBA wants to be what we call a systemically important bank, wants to be in the top tier of banking in Ghana. It's a fairly young bank. It came into Ghana in 2005 and 6 thereabouts. So compared to some of the banks like Stanchart or Absa, Barclays, we're a relatively young bank. But I think we're part of that Nigerian wave of banks that came into Ghana. I think there's still a ways to go to be in the top tier.
Well, you remember, UBA Ghana is the biggest subsidiary operations of the UBA PLC outside Nigeria. Now, the objective has always been to position UBA Ghana as a dominant player, in the financial sector in this country. But how well do you think you've positioned UBA within the Ghanaian banking sector? What makes the bank better than the others?
Well, today, currently, when we look at the banking leagues, UBA is number 11 or 12. So clearly, we still have a way to go if we want to be in the top 5, which is what we commonly refer to as the tier 1 banks. What you can say about the Nigerian banks as a whole is that they tend to be quite aggressive. They want to be more customer focused. They want results. I think UBA is trying to do that. But it also means trying to take business away from some of the established banks It means getting into new product lines like treasury or trading.
That's what all banks do. So, but
Trying
we
to-
look at the top 10 banks in Ghana in terms of revenue, profits, and deposits, or volumes of loan given. UBA seems not to make, the list, as you said. What seems to be the problem? Does that worry you as a board chair? Does it worry you?
It worries me very much as a board chair because the challenge and the desire is to be in that top 10, top 5 even. I would say in general, UBA is a relatively conservative bank compared to some of the bigger banks out there.
One of the biggest in Nigeria.
It's one of the biggest banks in
Right.
Nigeria, for sure.
Why is it difficult to penetrate here? That's what I'm trying to say.
It's a fair question, Akosua. I just think that it's taken us a while to really understand the customer base. It's taken us a while to get the performance that we're looking for.
Are we operating the bank as a Nigerian bank or a Ghanaian bank? Is it the same culture? Have you seen the culture of Ghanaians? Because especially for your staff, they complain a lot, about how you overwork them. So does these translate into, the low results that you're getting?
I think there's an ongoing conversation about how we motivate our staff. So that's always something to be thoughtful of. I think the issue with a lot of group banks is that you work within a system. It's not just Ghana. We may be doing things in Ghana, but it has to work across the group. And I think that's really where some of the challenge is. But Ghana is a very competitive banking market. And I think UBA has seen that compared to some other banks. It's a very competitive market. And I suppose we're just, it's taking us a while to really penetrate.
So how do we do that? I'm interested. How do we penetrate?
How do you penetrate?
How do we get there?
Banking is about relationships. And I think that we need to spend more time developing those relationships, especially in the corporate side. It's also about sort of understanding those areas where we can manage the risk. There's a lot of small business that we haven't really attracted or focused on. I think we're trying to do more of that. There are areas like trading, trade lines that we need to do more of, treasury, we need to do more of. I can say all of those things, but you know as well as I do that currently the banking sector itself has some challenges. And, we just came to agreement with the Ministry of Finance and the government on how certain instruments like the bonds and the T-bills, or the bonds in particular, would be dealt with. And many banks, UBA is no exception, has exposure to those. From a certain point of view, our conservatism has helped us because our exposure to some of these bonds is not as big as some of the other banks. But in the past, you could say that that was an area where you could grow the business.
2022 was quite a tough and a challenging year. Economic conditions in the country, deteriorated with inflation and interest rate increasing significantly. How did this affect your bank?
It affects us in a number of ways. I would say the first is interest rates rise. They were over 30% in some cases. Well, you have different reference rates. So that makes it hard for businesses to even borrow money because it's hard to repay. The default rate goes up. So that's one area where, if you like, you see more defaults and your risk gets higher. I think in general, again, where it really hit us is that we couldn't loan to small businesses or corporates because it was just very, very expensive.
Do you even loan at all? Do you do that?
We loan not as much as we should or we would like, but we do.
Yes. Is there a reason why you don't do that? You don't do more?
Well, I don't think there's a policy not to loan, but I think it's common knowledge that our risk asset base is relatively small compared to
collecting and milking people, just take and not invest in the people you give the money to.
I hope not. I think we recognize that banking is more than that. And as I said, banking really is about relationships, and they're long term, and sometimes they take a while to develop, and we just have to do more.
I'm interested in you as a board chair again. So 2020, you just came on 2022. Is there a point where you thought I shouldn't have taken this position because of all these things happening right now? Is there a point where you regret taking it?
I've not reached that point yet. I certainly feel that the bank has good aspirations, good vision, good energy, and good enthusiasm. We're spending a lot of time looking at how we can streamline systems and processes so that we can do things quicker, so that decision making is quicker, so that staff are more empowered. I think that's very important in a subsidiary bank as well. So these are things we spend time doing, and we need to do more.
Government had to implement a domestic debt exchange program as part of its debt restructuring effort, and banks, including UBA, had to sign up for this program. And many believe that the debt exchange mostly shifted or made the banks bankrupt, or government to the individuals and all that, and financial institutions, especially banks. Is that how you see it? Did it make you guys bankrupt and individuals?
I mentioned earlier our exposure to some of these instruments is relatively small compared to some of the major banks. It certainly didn't make us bankrupt. It reduced our profitability. There are certain measures that a bank thinks about. Profitability is one, liquidity is very important, and solvency is another. There's a term that you may be familiar with called capital adequacy ratio. These things, how much capital you keep to make sure that your customers are taken care of. We're still above those statutory limits. So relatively speaking, UBA actually came off quite well with the debt exchange program, relatively speaking, because our exposure was actually, as I said, quite small. The fact of the matter is a lot of other banks were affected. The industry as a whole has been hugely affected. And I think what we worry about is more about, does that, create contagion? But so far, I would say that I think the government is very well aware, and the Bank of Ghana is very well aware of this. So there's effort
Really?
being made to manage this.
Concerns again have been raised about the adverse impact of the debt exchange on the banking sector, with some predicting that an impending banking crisis, could occur. So does this situation look dire, or is just something that we're saying?
I think it's one of concern, but I also know that the government is, they talked of a fund to stabilize the banking sector or those banks that may have difficulties. So I'm not sure that, the industry will collapse. I don't see that happening.
It
But
is inevitable. Again, the banks will suffer losses quick when some are expected to face solvency problems. So what is the situation like?
I can't speak for all banks. I certainly can't. I'm not in a position to do that. But we do know that some banks will be very hard hit. We know this for a fact. Will they go under? I can't say. But I do know that UBA will not be one of them.
Should we expect to see financial support from UBA in Nigeria, to prevent a bank as a parent bank for the UBA Ghana? If anything like that happens?
If it were to come to that, I mean, that's what the group is there for support. But I don't think we'll need it.
We've never seen your reports. I mean, I've been surfing the internet looking for your annual report.
We put out an annual report every year.
How much did you make last year?
Oh, I would say in terms of profitability, I don't have the number in front of me, but I suspect we made, between 150 to 200 million cedis. Profit.
Government securities were supposed to be the safest. We all know that. Then debt exchange program happened. Trust in government right now, securities have been receiving a massive blow. What should be the way forward?
I would say government is trying to find a way forward. I mean, they've been in extensive discussions with bondholders. They've come up with an agreement that was announced very recently. The debt exchange program has been completed. We heard over 80% of bondholders came into the program. So, just reading what needs to happen, government is doing those things to stabilize, to bring down their outflows, and hopefully they will complete that. There's still work to be done, as I suspect you know, but I think the steps that have been outlined are the roadmap to conclusion.
I see. So 150 million. I want to know, what have you contributed to society? I mean, you made this much money, so what are you doing to say that, well, thank you for doing business with us, so this is what we are supporting you with?
Banking sort of serves a couple of different functions. I mean, there's the corporate role, which is especially helping businesses in particular to grow, helping individuals, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's a car loan, whether it's a loan for school. These are all products, but
yes, we pay back. We're talking about things that you do, like a CSR.
we do a lot of things in education. We support schools. We have quiz programs. We have a very particular focus on education and helping young people. And there are a number of programs we participate in that we do.
Good stuff. Moving on to the economy, if it's in the best of shapes, I don't know what to say about that. I'm not sure it is. Is it in the best of shape to you?
Well, of course not.
Okay. What is your, I would say, general observation about the economy? Does it look bright to you? How do you see the future? Does the future look bright?
I don't know that there are too many people who will say the economy is in good shape. I mean, our debts, let's talk about inflation, for instance. Last year was over 50%. I mean, that is extraordinary. Interest rates, we talked about over 30%. We saw what happened to the exchange rate, went from 6 at the beginning of the year to the dollar to now. I think it stabilized at about 12. It went up to 15, came down to 12. Our debt to GDP was over 100%, was 104% at the last count. Those are unprecedented numbers, and many of us haven't seen that in our lifetimes. So the economy is not in good shape, and that's why we've gone to the IMF. We need help to stabilize the economy. We all hope that with this IMF program, that stability comes. There's we've heard of what we call the debt sustainability plan, and government can put together that plan in a way that allows us to really stabilize the economy and improve. But we're in that process now.
Talking about government, I think during the State of the Nation address again, the president said that the next 22 months of his mandate will be focused on restoring the economy. And, we've had before COVID, he still mentions that before COVID, and then, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine to the period of rapid growth. First of all, what do you make of governments consistently blaming our current situation on COVID and the war? Secondly, are you convinced that the president can actually restore to rapid growth before his tenure ends?
A couple of different questions in that. I think many of us, and I include myself in that, think that certainly COVID hurt us, and certainly the Russian-Ukraine war also impacted supply lines and various things like that.
Was it that massive? Do you think it was so massive?
But I don't think that is the only explanation for why we are here today. And when we talk about debt to GDP being up over 100%, when we talk about borrowing $8 billion in between 2017 to 2021, there are things this government has done to contribute to the crisis we're in. So clearly, Russia-Ukraine impacted, COVID impacted, but also I think the actions of government has also contributed to where we are today.
What did government do, in your opinion?
I talked about some of it already, which is just, already, most governments come into a place where our public sector, the wages we pay to the public sector used to be the largest component of the budget. I mean, they run 35% on an annual year. I think in the last couple of years was the first time our debt service exceeded our public sector wages. So, just think of two elements of the budget, wages and debt service, that now took up 65, 70% of the budget. It gives very little room to do other things.
So with this said, again, are you convinced that the president can restore the economy to normal?
Am I convinced? I would like him to succeed, but let's see. I think, I think the IMF program will help us a lot. 22 months is a short time, but let's see. Let's see.
Now, the government has expressed optimism about, securing the IMF deal by the end of March to enable it deliver macroeconomic stability and debt stability, sustainability. What do you make of the concerns that this will not happen because we are not yet close to China, gotten any agreement with China?
Well, it's the 20th of March, so 11 more days to the end of March.
21st, yeah.
I think it's a tight deadline. I'm not privy to all the details. We know as well that
But we need China.
There's a
do.
bilateral conversation
Right.
with China that has to take place, and that is yet to conclude or yet to start or both. It's probably started, but yet to conclude. So the deadline is tight. Like I said, it'd be great if they can do it, but the deadline is very tight.
So do you again think once we secure the IMF deal, it's going to be like a magic wand? Will everything, just fall in place?
No. There's still a lot of work to be done. Let's remember, I mean, there are structural issues within the economy. We talked about, public sector wages. We talked about debt service. But we also, take even the energy sector, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I mean, there are massive arrears, $1.5 billion in arrears. There are many things that have to fall in place. We've talked about doing a much more export-oriented economy. We've talked about agriculture, infrastructure that is lacking. So these things take time, and these things take a lot of hard work and planning. Certainly, I don't think they'll happen in 22 months. I think the more important point is, are we going to lay the groundwork to allow it to happen? And I think that's where we have to think about, but it'll take some time.
More with Kweku Awotwi after the break. You're still watching The Hard Truth. We'll be right back to stay. Welcome back. You are still watching The Hard Truth. Board Chair, the Multimedia Group, and Board Chair, UBA Ghana. In fact, he serves on several other boards. Kweku Awotwi. So now, Kweku, let's move on to energy. Now, oil provides almost $1 billion in annual revenue, for us. What is your general assessment of the oil and gas business in Ghana?
It's a young business. We've been producing oil since 2011, 2012. We don't produce that much. We're producing less than 200,000 barrels a day compared to our neighbor next door, which produces Nigeria 2 million or thereabouts. So we're a fairly small oil province. That's to start. But we're already in decline. If you look at the numbers, our peak production happened a couple of years ago, and oil is it's not a renewable source, and the current basins that we're producing from, Jubilee, the 10 fields, even the Enak field, which is gas as well as oil, there are no new discoveries, let's say, from either the existing companies or new companies to maintain that profile or even to increase it. So if you look over the next 10, 15 years, oil is in decline.
But it's been argued that growing and replacing reserves in the country is challenged. Now, production from existing fields, it's plateauing, like you just mentioned, and we've also witnessed legal disputes and company exits that are in bad shapes in the country right now. So, is Ghana still an attractive hub for oil and gas investments?
We are making it very difficult for investors to come here. You mentioned the arbitration. We have arbitration with Enak as we speak. I believe not so long ago there was a tax dispute with both Cosmos and Tullow. I just found out that there was an agreement on a new block, what we call Block 3, that the government entered into agreement with a few years back, and they just canceled that. All of these things don't send reassuring signals to investors out there. Some of the big companies like Exxon have moved out. We know there's an issue with ACA AGM. I started by saying that Ghana is a small oil province. You would think that we'd be doing everything we can to enhance it, to bring in more investors and boost our production. I mean, there's certainly a train of thought that if we brought in more investment, we would find more oil. That's how it works.
To explore more.
Exactly. We're almost doing the opposite. We're scaring them away. And
do we understand? Let me just ask. Do we understand the oil exploration business? Do we, as a country, do we understand it?
Like I said, we just started. I mean, Nigeria's been producing oil for over 60 years. So you can say they understand it. I'm not saying we don't. I mean, the business is very international. You bring in the people who know what to do.
So why are we scaring investors away? What's the issue?
So it's more, I think it's a balance, and I don't want to suggest that it's an easy balance. I think every country wants to feel they want to get their share, and there's nothing wrong with that.
It's our oil, you say, so it's for us.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And there is a share. I mean, government does get a legitimate share of oil. There are a number of streams beyond the taxes. There's, there are various streams that come back to the government. So there's no question that, the government is getting a share. But over time, I think what happens is government thinks, well, I need a bit more. When you don't have oil, you think, well, let me do whatever I can to bring in the oil. Now the oil has come, you think, oh, maybe I should get a bit more. But a lot of these...
But don't they have contracts? I mean, you have to stick to the contract.
Exactly. So the big debate in most of these companies, whether it's Enak, whether it's Tullow, whether it's Jubilee, it's Cosmos, I have a stabilization agreement with you. It's not supposed to change. Why is that? Because I spent $12 billion investing in this business.
I need it back.
And I need it back.
Yeah.
And if you change it after 5 years or 10 years, you're making it very difficult for me to get my money back. And it's fair I should get my money back.
But Tullow Oil dragged the GRA to the International Chamber of Commerce over two elements of tax evasion and all of that. So $378 million plus penalties. Now, Tullow argued that the charges are a violation to its rights under the petroleum agreement. So, as a former MD of Tullow Ghana, what are your thoughts on this issue?
So there's been an ongoing dispute. I've not actually followed the current dispute as closely because I'm not there anymore. But there's always been an issue with what they call the Additional Oil Entitlement, AOE, and how it's computed. And, there's some historic dimension to it, based on, where you invest your money first, what blocks you invest in, and what is the basis for the investment. I hope I'm making myself clear. If I invest in block 1 and then I start spending some money in block 2, how do you account for that as basis for how I get my money back? So there's a little bit of that going on. I don't want to suggest that the companies have been perfect in their accounting or they're keeping the books, but I do think there have been some philosophical differences for how these things are done. And I know even in my time as the MD, there's this back and forth with the government as you owe this much, and Tullow says, no, we don't. And I suspect there's some of that going on as well. A lot of these things, you want to believe that, when you go to arbitration, you send a signal to your investors that we're having trouble resolving these issues, where if you could sit in a room with your representatives, you could sort it out. So that's not a good sign when you have to go to arbitration. It just sends a signal that you cannot get along with the people that you're working with.
Kweku, I'm sure you've been following the Gold for Oil program introduced by government to lower fuel price and, to receive pressures on the national's forex reserve. So what do you make of this policy again?
To be honest, I have not quite appreciated the value of it.
Why?
Well, I think the goal of it is to save our forex, and I've heard the argument, and I guess the other part of it is we have gold. I heard the minister the other day talk about we are going to buy the gold from small scale miners, which and technically we're supposed to do anyway. We also know that there's a lot of gold that is smuggled out of the country. I mean, close to some numbers, $1 billion a year of gold is smuggled out. The point I'm making is I think it's a fair idea in terms of the purpose of it. I just wonder how effective it will be to actually save our forex.
Yeah, but the government also paint, or they seem to paint the narrative that if they go for your policy will lead to the reduction in the cost of fuel. Is that how you see it too?
Let's see. I'm not completely convinced.
Transparency issues have been raised on this policy, like you just say now. So what are your personal observations in relation to it?
As I said, I mean, the principle of it seems reasonable. I'm going to repeat myself. The idea of reducing.
So should we scrap it? Do you think it should be scrapped or maintained?
I think it's more how you sort of look at the different pieces of it. Where's the gold coming from? How much are we, ascribing to the value of the gold? I mean, it's the details for me that make the difference, and I think that's where the scrutiny has to come. And if we feel that those details are properly attended to, are we really collecting the gold from the small scale miners? What is the price we're putting on the gold? What is the exchange? It's the details where, for me, that I think are important here.
Look, finally, on energy, what is your take on the 1 month revenue mobilization exercise currently undertaken by the ECG Company of Ghana, especially in relation to what your boss said, that the company is owed over 5 billion Ghana cedis from months of September to February 2023?
I think it's great that there's leadership in the ECG to collect this money.
I think he's on the ground himself,
yes,
doing that.
I heard him today on the radio. And he has, I mean, it's clear that he's making a lot of effort in this regard. Once again, it's one of these things where it would be great if he succeeds, but you think about it, 5 billion cedis, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And it's not something you mentioned a period, but these arrears have been collecting over time. I'm not convinced it's all about the last few months. If we can put in place the systems to collect that money and we can keep them in place, that would be fantastic. The fact of the matter is the losses at ECG are over 30%. So for every unit of electricity that is produced by generators like the VRA or private players, we lose as a country over 30% of it just goes into thin air. So if these collection exercises will cap that will make a big difference.
But concerns have been raised about government indebtedness to independent power producers who generate about 50% of power distributed to the state. Does the current state, again, of our power sector give any, assurances that we are safe from doing so?
Not from where I sit. Once again, $1.5 billion is a lot of money. And so here's the difference. ECG says they're owed $5.7 billion is the number I heard. $1.5 billion is times 10, 12, 13 billion. So it's a lot of money, and there are 5 or 6 IPPs involved. And so it's not just one company. And they, as you said, they produce 50% of the country's power. Once again, these numbers have been building up over time. It didn't happen yesterday or the day before. They've been happening for the last few years. So it speaks to the sustainability of the sector. And so government has a challenge. Address the arrears, pay them because they're not being paid, because they're not being paid means they can't, pay back their loans. They can't pay for operational and maintenance and spares. They can't do the things that a normal company would do as time goes on. And I think they're getting to that point. But you also then have to create an environment where you don't build up these arrears again. And I think that...
So how do they do that? How do you...
I think there are a number of things that have to happen. We talked about a bit the revenue exercise ECG is doing is one of them because it's plugging the leaks.
But you also said 1 month won't be enough to collect all these money.
Well, I'm just saying it's a bit like the 22-month
22
deadline.
months, right?
These are very ambitious goals. If we can meet them, why wouldn't we be happy? But I think that's at the same time these problems didn't occur yesterday, so why do we think they would be solved tomorrow? It kind of thing. I think we need to be realistic about the time frame. But the intent is good, and if we can make, I think the other thing that happens a lot of the time is that we have a great idea, we put in some effort. After 2 months, we stop doing something different, and that's the issue we have. Can we sustain the solutions, the good solutions that are being presented? So the sustainability of the sector has a lot to do with loss collections. It has to do with the leakages. It also has to do with the price of power. And I know that, not long ago, PRC increased tariffs. I mean, folks didn't like that, but, when you thought about inflation and the exchange rate, these are things that had to be done. Because the fact of the matter is, these IPPs owe money to the banks that lent them the money to build in the first place. And if government owes them 1.5 billion, they're not doing that. And that's a problem.
I see. Now, you serve as a board chair of the multimedia group. So I'm sure you are very much interested in the freedom of the press. How would you assess press freedom in the country?
There's always a sort of a glass half full, half empty picture that one can paint. From a certain point of view, Ghana is known as a place you can air your views and nobody will put you in prison most of the time.
It used to be.
Most of the time. But the fact of the matter is we've had journalists killed over time the last few years. We've had journalists intimidated and harassed over the last couple of years because of views they've stated. The trend is not going in the right direction in terms of, freedom of journalists, the safety of journalists to report on legitimate news. That is happening before our very eyes. So as much as generally we are, a free country, if you will, and a peaceful country, I do think the intimidation of journalists is on the rise, and that's not a good thing.
So how do we strengthen the, media?
Well, there are a number of, there are various legislative instruments and, legal, frameworks that are supposed to be, in place.
But don't we have these things already? I mean, we say this a lot. Don't we have them already?
It's about enforcement. And, we're not enforcing.
We'll be right back.
Yeah, it's a
problem. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You are still watching the season finale of The Hard Truth. Mr. Kweku Awotwi, board chair of UBA, board chair multimedia, and several other boards is still here. 2024 is just around the corner. They've started campaigning, or parties have started campaigning, and we've seen several presidential hopefuls declare their, intentions, including, former President Mahama, here. Kennedy Japan, and all these several names that we hear. What do you make of these names that are popping up? Do you have any hope in any of them?
I think we do need some fresh faces. I would say. I would say that the country would benefit from some fresh leadership from a certain point of view, and if they can bring that, that's a good thing.
Are we ready? I mean, we say this a lot. But are we ready to have fresh faces? Do you think Ghana is ready for something like that?
I think so.
Do you think former President Mahama deserves a second term based on his record?
The wonderful thing about politics is that the people decide that. So if the people think that he deserves
I'm
it,
asking you as a person, as a voter, do you think he deserves a second term?
really it's not for me to say. I mean, he can point to his last 4 years and he said he did a number of things. And he did. I mean, he built a new airport, he's got a lot of roads built. So there's tangible things he has done that he can put forward to the people and say, look at what I did. Equally, there are some things that people weren't very happy about. And it's a scale, are the positives outweigh the negatives? At the end of the day, I think the calculus for a lot of people is what's the alternative?
Yeah.
And he knows his way around. I mean, there's an argument that he's going to get only one term, but equally, he has the experience and the knowledge that perhaps he can be more effective the next term around. So I don't know that it's that clear cut whether he deserves, he doesn't. It's a scale that has to be.
So in scaling up, do you think in thinking about it, do you think we should say, well, like you said, he's been there, he knows his mistakes, so let's just try again and see? Do we just go on that tangent to say, let's try him and see because he's been there?
I would say, my calculus and perhaps a lot of others would be, who's he running against? And I think that would make the difference.
Have you been generally impressed with the performance of Vice President Bawumia? And what kind of president would he make, in your opinion? Let's talk about his performance first.
Sure. I think the Vice President has done a lot in the digitalization space. He has spearheaded a lot of that. And I do think those benefits are not immediately obvious to most of us here, but we'll see that in time. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that.
Maybe tell us, what will we see in time?
Well, what it is that, because systems are digitalized, payments, taxes, revenue collections from government will become a lot easier. Even finding you where you live because it's digitized. These are things that inform all our lives. And we've done that in the last few years, and he spearheaded it. So it'll start to show up in revenue collections and efficiency of government services, and so many other areas. So I do think that's a very important initiative that he has spearheaded. What kind of president he will be, I have no idea, because there's a big difference between being a president and a vice president.
Can he be a president?
Anyone can be a president.
Let's look at the comparison. The Bawumia who campaigned, or who was campaigning then, and then the VIP Bawumia. How do you compare the two? Are these two different personalities? Do you think it's the same person, or you have two different personalities here?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think what happens is when you enter office, the realities of public office become much clearer to you than when you are not actually in office. So I think it's the same person, and I think he's confronting those realities and trying to deal with them. He's also confronting them in a sort of a construct. He's part of a party, and they have to have a certain unified position on things.
But
and
he's quiet now. What do you think that they should be? Why is he quiet? He's quiet.
I don't really know.
But do you think he's quiet? Is he quiet?
I've heard him recently. I mean, he speaks a lot on initiatives from the government.
So he speaks. Okay. So what would you remember most of our president? I mean, is there anything that you would remember of our president Akosua?
The current one?
Yeah.
I would say I think his leadership during COVID was really commendable and impressive. Unfortunately for us, I think the last 12 to 15 months where the macroeconomy has really deteriorated is what currently most of us remember.
You're on record to have said that the current party season or two-party season has not really or actually delivered the benefits that you envisaged since 1992. Do you still hope for that future?
Do I still believe that? Or very much so. Very much so. I do think that currently our constitutional framework, our institutional framework, we talked about it, lack of enforcement in many areas. But even the constitutional underpinnings, for me, are not yielding the benefits that we all hope democracy brings. I mean, we're very partisan. Everything is sort of filtered through a two-party system. If you look around the world, many countries don't work on a two-party system. I think Europe is a particular example where coalition building is very much a part of the political conversation. And what that does, it forces you to sort of come to the middle on very important things. But I also think that what's happening currently is that, in my view, certainly the Constitution, provides, too much power to the executive branch. There's not enough accountability. We talk about local government elections. We don't have them. There's just not enough checks and balances and too much power invested in the executive, in my view, that it encourages the wrong type of behavior. But more importantly, it doesn't get accounted for.
So until that changes, what will happen? Is there hope for us?
Until that changes, basically those are the incentives for continued behavior in a certain way. And if, just to stay with that, I mean, there's a lot of conversation these days about constitutional reform, and you hear some people say we need a new constitution. I don't think we need a new constitution, but we certainly need amendments. Even some of the oldest constitutions in the world, like the US, they've had many amendments. And so the conversation shouldn't be, we need a new constitution. The conversation is, what are the amendments that address the imbalances we currently have, where we have insufficient accountability or too much executive power or no local government elections. I mean, there are things that we can identify. And we know for a fact, President Mills, 10 odd years ago, set up his committee to look at these.
They brought a report, but
nothing's happened.
Yeah, nothing's happened.
So there's an understanding that something has to happen because of these incentives that are not in place. And I think that if we don't address them, we'll just continue doing what we do. And I don't think that's good for us.
Finally, if you had the opportunity to serve as the president of Ghana, what would you like to change the most in the country?
I would say there are a couple of things. One of the things that Ghana really prided itself on, newly independent, was the skill and expertise of its civil service. And, there are stories you may have heard where, Lee Kuan Yew came and copied our model of the civil service and took it to Singapore. But, I've always believed that we need what I would call a muscular government, not a big government, a very capable, very well-trained government, as in the civil service. And when you look at countries like Singapore in particular, who are the same age we are, if you like, perhaps a much smaller country, their success is hinged on this very capable civil service. We've turned the civil service into this partisan place, and ministers, bring in assistants and chief directors who know nothing about the sector, have very little experience, and they come and go. And so, if we have a plan to build a new road or a hospital, after 4 years, that plan becomes something else. So I would say the first thing that has to happen is to really strengthen the civil service and depoliticize it, but also make it a merit-based society. That's something we've also lost along the way. We used to think of these things as a merit-based society. We've lost that. And I think that has to happen, and that has to seep through. There are other areas where, even as we try and create a muscular, strong government service, we need to create much more, byways for the private sector to flourish. And we talked about high interest rates.
Creating an enabling environment for the privite sector to flourish.
We're not doing that either. So, but I would.
So with that said, are you interested in becoming the president of Ghana?
Let's just put it this way: if someone asked me to consider it, I would, but it's not a focus of mine.
Thank you so much for talking to The Hard. I've been speaking to the board chairman of the United Bank for Africa (UBA), Mr. Kweku Awotwi. We've had a great conversation, spanning from the banking and to the energy sector, media freedom and politics. Now, catch a repeat of the program on Saturday at 3 p.m. And with this, we draw the curtains of the 17th season of The Hard Truth. A big thank you to all our guests, viewers, partners, crew, and all those who work to make this program a success. It would be great coming back with another season with reverting interviews. My name is Nana Akosua Konadu Asante-Samuels. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good evening.